You're listening to The Physician's Mind, raw stories and real talks from people striving for greatness in medicine and in life. This is where ambition meets action and where the relentless come to level up. I'm your host, Curtis Wilkerson. Thank you so much for listening. Let's get right into it. Alrighty, folks, welcome to the Physician's Mind podcast. I am Curtis Wilkerson, and today I'm honored to be speaking with Dr. Jordan Frey. Dr. Frey, how are you doing today, sir? Thanks for joining me.
Good. How are you?
Fantastic. So let's dive right into it here, sir. You've described yourself as the poor plastic surgeon when you started. Can you take us back to that moment when you first checked your net worth and it was negative $520,000? What was going through your mind and what shifted once you realized that?
Yeah, it was, it's interesting. And I'll kind of even back up a little bit to before I checked that the first time. And I was towards the end of my training. So I did plastic surgery, which is 6 years, and then a fellowship in microsurgery. But so I was getting to the end of my training and I realized I was burned out basically. And I'd been having these symptoms for a bit, for like a few years, and hadn't really placed them. And then I finally did. And I was surprised because I was just very much like a keep your head down, keep working, keep moving forward kind of person. And so when I realized that, I tried to think about, okay, well, what's causing this? And they're like anyone that's going through that, there's a bunch of reasons for it. But for me, a huge one was like a lack of financial well-being, which is something I didn't even consider part of overall well-being at all. But I was in this situation where, like I said, I was at the end of the training. Everyone was telling me, "Oh, congratulations, this is fantastic. You're finally at the end of all this hard work. Everything's going to be great. You're going to make all this money now, etc." And like in my head, I was going like, no, it's not just all great. I have $500,000 of student loans. I have credit card debt. I have literally no savings, no investments. I don't know how to go about that at all. I have a young family. Yes, my income's going to increase a bunch, but I'm just learning about all these new expenses that I'm going to have that seem like they're going to increase even more than my income. Like I need to get a fancy doctor car, a big doctor house. I need to get nice suits. I need to get all this stuff to fit this image of, a physician. And I just didn't see how I was ever going to get out of that hamster wheel. At that point, I didn't even have a definition of financial freedom or this idea that you could work because you want to, not because you have to. But I just felt like, okay, I'm going to need to do this until I'm like 100 years old, and that's it. And you just have this idea when you start medicine of you go, okay, I'm going to go through all of these hard things, all these hoops I have to jump through: medical school, residency, licensing, boards, all this stuff. And when I get to the end, it's all going to be worth it. And here I was at the end, and it wasn't everything I had kind of imagined or built it up to be. And it wasn't just going to happen. Like I had to do something about it. So with that in mind, kind of recognizing that the financial well-being was a big piece that was kind of missing, my wife and I just started learning about personal finance, just really simple, basic stuff like, hey, you should save some of your money. As silly as that sounds, that just wasn't even something we were doing or even necessarily saw our parents doing or had ever learned about, like how to save money, how to invest money, etc. And then as part of that, I learned about like what net worth is, kind of this concept that it doesn't really matter how much money you make, it's how much money you save and how you use that money that determines your ability to reach financial freedom. And net worth is kind of your calculation of where you are on that path to financial freedom. And so, yeah, so I calculated it, which anyone who wants to do that, you can just Google, net worth calculator. They're all pretty much the same, but it has you add up your assets, which are pretty much things you own that put money in your pocket. So that's things like investments, stock investments, investment in real estate, that cash flows, things like that, minus your liabilities, which are things you own that take money out of your pocket, which for most of us is debt of some form, whether that be student debt, a mortgage on your primary house, things like that. And so you take your assets, you subtract your liabilities, and what you're left with is your net worth. Again, in my case, going in, I knew it was going to be bad. I didn't know how bad, and I kind of dreaded it. And so I calculated it out, and it was, like you said, like more negative than negative 500,000. And I was surprised because I wasn't like thrilled to see that. I wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm crushing it. But I wasn't as demoralized or defeated as I thought I would be. I obviously wasn't happy with the number itself, but I finally could kind of see through that calculation, like, okay, here are the things I need to be doing better at in building my assets. And here are all these liabilities I have, and I need to start getting rid of them. Here's what I can do about that. And through that exercise, kind of developed a rough financial plan, again, in conjunction with my wife, where we said, okay, this is what we're, this is where we want to be in the future. This is what we're going to do to get there financially. Things like, again, we're going to save a certain percentage of our money. We're going to invest it this way. We're going to pay off debt, etc. And that gave us a pathway that at the time said in 25 years, we can reach financial freedom, or we will have enough saved up and invested that we can work because we want to, not because we have to. And that timeline's compressed now that I've kind of done some other things. But at that point, that was super freeing for us. Because again, we had this thing where we said, we don't need to worry about it. As long as we're following this plan that we have, we're doing the basic things we laid out in this plan, we know we're going to reach financial freedom. So we don't need to stress about that. We can kind of that pressure from ourselves and that monkey on our back of, we're going to have to work forever. We're kind of the hamster running in the hamster wheel. And that honestly allowed me to focus a lot more on what I loved about medicine and about operating and all the stuff I did on a daily basis that, to be honest, I kind of had lost a lot of joy in, just because I felt this bitterness towards medicine that I wasn't where I thought I was going to be. And so I honestly found that after that, like I became a better physician. And to me, that was eye-opening because the taboo you hear mostly in medicine is we didn't get into medicine for the money. We got into it to help people. So we shouldn't be thinking about the money. And I do get that. And I think what most people mean is like that shouldn't necessarily be the primary focus, or we shouldn't compromise patient care for money or anything like that, which is hopefully obvious. But I think what it's grown into is just that we shouldn't think about money at all. But what I found is I actually became a better doctor when I started thinking about my own financial situation. Um, and so, like I said, that was really eye-opening. And I saw a lot of people in the same position. And so that's why I kind of started talking about it and where that interest came. But before that, I'd actively ignored finance. I never particularly had an interest in it or anything like that. So it was a very long-winded answer to your question, but that's sort of how that all came about. And the surprising feeling I had looking and finding out what my net worth was, which was really empowering because I felt like I could finally do something about it now that I understood it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the journey sort of begun with a sense of burnout, coming towards the end of training, wondering why you're not feeling the satisfaction, and sort of realizing that there was really no financial well-being at that time, and tons of debt. You were working on a young family, trying to figure out how to navigate these challenges. Felt like you were stuck in the hamster wheel, and beginning to plan, beginning to form financial plans gave you that sense of security, allowed you to focus more on enjoying your work and just becoming a better doctor. And now ultimately it's turned into something great. So to detract from the financial side for a moment, what was it that drew you to plastic surgery specifically?
Yeah, in terms of plastic surgery, I started out in medical school and I felt like I would lean towards a surgical specialty because I liked doing things, fixing things, working with my hands. And as I got to experience surgery, that just kind of reaffirmed it. And, then it was figuring out what surgical specialty. And I initially thought general surgery or maybe orthopedic surgery, something like that. What I found was, and I think those are amazing specialties, but, you know, a lot of it was sort of cookie cutter or figured out already in a sense. If you had a broken femur, this is how you fixed it. If you needed your gallbladder out, this is how you took it out. And I ended up rotating in plastic surgery. And what I loved about it was, number one, plastic surgeons, we weren't confined to one area of the body. It wasn't like general surgeons, which is broadly the abdomen or maybe the chest cavity. With plastic surgery, you literally operate from the feet to the face and hands and all this stuff. And what I also liked is, especially on the reconstructive side, there was a lot of creativity. You could show the same defect to different plastic surgeons and they would have a lot of different creative ways that they could fix it. And so that just kind of really attracted me to it. And so Now what my practice is mainly is reconstructive plastic surgery. So, I do a lot of like breast reconstruction using patient's own tissue, lower extremity reconstruction, upper extremity reconstruction, gender affirmation, stuff like that, where you're moving tissue from one area of the body to repurpose it to replace form or function somewhere else. And so for me, that's just like really rewarding in terms of with the patients that they come in with a problem, and you're able to very tangibly fix it and improve their situation and their quality of life. And again, just from a creative sense, and sort of being able to be familiar with and have to master, the whole anatomy of the body, that just really was attractive to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, the comprehensive nature is very interesting. Now,
Yeah.
to talk about your brand, the Prudent Plastic Surgeon, I wanted to ask what inspires you to create that, what it's all about, and then once we've discussed that, let's go into your financial journey. But first and foremost, could you tell us what the Prudent Plastic Surgeon is all about?
Yeah, so it's basically the blog I started kind of right at the end of where I was talking about before, when I kind of had that epiphany and realized, hey, we had created this financial plan, and just having that pathway to reach financial freedom really improved my burnout. It made me a better doctor, kind of rekindled my love of medicine, or made me rediscover what I loved about medicine, I think. Um, and at that point, I had a lot of co-residents and other people kind of talking to me about this and saying, man, I've really felt this similarly and going through a similar thing. And I foolishly, I thought, I was like the only one going through this. We tend to have that feeling when we're going through something. And there were other resources out there of doctors talking about this, but at the time, really most of them were not in clinical medicine anymore, or they kind of had completed their path to financial freedom, and so they were sort of shouting instruction back from the finish line to, the runners going through the marathon. And I thought, well, it'd be really cool if there was someone like me going through this that was talking about it as it was happening. And so then I'd never blogged before. I always enjoyed writing, but I thought, you know what, I'll talk about it as I go through it, and like I'll talk about all the mistakes I've made, and kind of how I progressed through this journey. And that's what I still do. I'm not at financial freedom yet, so I just started writing about it, and I said, you know what? If in 6 months, 12 months, nobody's reading it, then I'll put it away. But it kind of got picked up, and people started reading it and took off after that, and it's been a really fulfilling thing. And the what we're about, the biggest thing is just like radical transparency about the topic of finances and business within medicine and practice building, kind of all this stuff we don't necessarily get in training. Training, I think the residency system does a fantastic job of making us really skilled and knowledgeable doctors in terms of patient care, which is obviously a top priority. But I think what it doesn't do a great job of is teach us this other side, kind of the practice side of medicine, the financial side. And, that's what I wanted to talk more about, again, very transparently from my own situation, just because I think, and I saw again how much better a doctor I became once I learned about this stuff and had kind of improved my wellness in that facet. And I honestly believe, if we had a nation of financially free doctors, we would be able to fix so much of healthcare, because we wouldn't, again, we could work and practice medicine not because we needed to for the paycheck, but because we wanted to. And we would be able to just transform things in terms of how hospital systems work, how healthcare, how insurance works, everything like that. So I truly think it's a broader cause than even just individual physicians, which is an important enough situation, or something to address.
Yeah, yeah. So it started out as just a blog, so you could detail the journey of your financial progress, and now it's just turned into a pretty renowned platform for sharing radically transparent ideas about finance and medicine and beyond. So that's super cool. In fact, I believe I discovered your page because I was looking into something about student loans, or it was some medical finance thing, and that's how I stumbled
Yeah.
upon your page. So that's incredible. Yeah, it's definitely come a long way, and it's become something very useful. So something I've read, please correct me if I'm wrong, but you managed to go from a negative net worth to over $1 million in about 18 months. So what were some of the decisions and habits that led to such an awesome turnaround?
The biggest, it was right around, I got fortunate and luck plays a big part in everything. And it's kind of like, the more you apply yourself, the more luck you have. But the luck that I experienced was that I discovered this right before I made the transition from a trainee to an attending. And for anyone listening who's already an attending, you can have the same kind of success and apply the same kind of principles and everything like that. But that transition is a really important time, right? Because when we're coming out of training, we, have made very little money up to that point. All of a sudden, our salary jumps a huge amount, and we have all this delayed pent up gratification, and we can go out and we can kind of spend all that money on, like I said, like a Dr. House, a Dr. Carr, these kind of things, or we can use it for a different purpose. So in my case, what my wife and I were able to do is we transitioned. I was training in New York City. We were moving to Buffalo, New York, which is where I'm from originally and where I still am now. So we took all of a sudden this money that we were getting through, my signing bonus, and then both of us were starting our jobs. My wife as a professor, she was completing her PhD in New York City, and myself as an attending. And we created a savings rate of 50 to 60%. So of our gross income, pre-tax income, we are saving half or more of it. And that's very easy to do when you're coming out of training because you're used to living on like a shoestring budget. So even just increasing it, what we did, like we were living like, kings and queens basically compared to what we were used to in residency. But then we had this extra money. And so we decided we were going to split it up into three buckets: a third, a third, a third. A third of that savings we were taking and we were going to pay off debt aggressively. So I had a ton of student debt, like I said, about 500,000. About half of that was all private. So that was debt that was never going to get forgiven, etc. So we paid that off super aggressively, and within a year and a half had that paid off. The remainder we used towards making minimum monthly income payments, income-based payments to our federal debt, my federal debt. I'm at a point now where I'm one payment away from forgiveness, and like I'm stuck in this purgatory because I was on the save plan. We could talk about that later. So hopefully that comes through. If not, then we'll just aggressively pay off the rest, of which I think there's like 175,000 or something. So that was one third of our savings, what we did. The other third, what we did was we invested the money somewhat traditionally in like K 57, these retirement accounts, and so would build up a nest egg that way. And then a third of it we put towards real estate investing. So we would take this money, and what we would do is we would use it as a down payment on a multifamily rental property. So we started out in 2020, we bought a small duplex in Buffalo, New York. We did some minor fixes to it. We rented it out. That cash flowed, meaning that the money that was coming into our pocket after all expenses, including the mortgage, maintenance, insurance, etc., was about $1,000 a month. So we took that $1,000 a month in addition to the other money that we were saving just from our paychecks. We saved it for a second down payment, and then we kind of snowballed to now where we have 9 properties. And so we did that, and all of those things taken together grew our net worth to over $1 million now.
And that was all in the span of that 18 months, huh?
That was all in the span of that 18 months. Again, and with the cash flow, with the savings that we built up and invested, with our debt being decreased significantly. We did take on a mortgage with our primary home, but we did that in a very intentional way. We didn't have car payments, and again decreased that student loan significantly. So our liabilities dropped to very minimal, and our assets grew a ton with, again, that money we were saving and investing in retirement accounts, with the cash flowing real estate that we had, which was, again, putting money in our pocket and also appreciating based on the market. So that was how we did it.
And how long ago was it now that you finished your training?
It'll be 5 years in July.
Okay. And are you doing private practice work? Or are you part of a group? What does that look like?
No, so I'm a hospital employee. So it's a group of 5 of us who are reconstructive plastic surgeons, and we are hospital employed.
Okay. Now, what were some of the biggest money mistakes you made early on? Some things that maybe in hindsight you wouldn't have done? How would you correct them now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest ones that I made were, I didn't, all through residency, and it would have continued until I was an attending, had I not sort of gone through this whole process, but was not paying myself, was not creating a savings rate. In residency, it's very easy to kind of write that off or say, oh, well, I'm making so little I can't save anything. But that's not really the case. And it's not impossible, but it's very hard to like reach financial freedom in residency. So it's not like your savings rate is going to make a huge dent or get you even 50% of the way to financial freedom or something like that in training. It's really just about growing the habits that will get you there in the future. So when I was still in training, after my wife and I came up with this financial plan, our savings rate initially was zero or even negative because we were using our credit card and taking on debt. And we said, we're not going to be able to reach the rule of thumb is like you want to have your savings rate be 20% of your gross income. We were like, we're not going to reach that living in New York City with two kids, but we can probably do better than 0%. So we said, let's make our savings rate 1% next month. And we track this by keeping a budget, by basically looking at what our expenses were, how much we brought in, and trying to say, okay, the difference between what our income was and what our expenses are, we want that to be 1%. And we did that. And we said, okay, next month we want to make it 2%, 3%, 4%. And we really got up to about that 4 or 5% range before we kind of hit a ceiling where we said, okay, our expenses are relatively fixed. This is just kind of what it is. But what that did was, again, it made it really easy when we made the transition and I became an attending and all of a sudden the income increased to say, okay, we're just used to it. We're going to have this savings rate. And that savings rate is essentially paying ourselves first. The paycheck comes in, we set aside some for ourselves, then we pay everything else. And that's a really powerful concept that just is not totally intuitive in our kind of like consumer driven world. So that was a big one. Again, I think not paying off debt for a long time was a big one. I just saw debt as this thing that was very normal. Again, maybe because of the way that I was raised or what I saw people in my life doing. But, I just built up like a bunch of credit card debt, which was not smart. Student loan wise, I basically throughout training just ignored it and hit defer every year, which that was a huge mistake because initially those deferred payments did not count towards public service loan forgiveness. I got lucky in that the temporary expanded public service loan forgiveness then retroactively did count those. So I got, again, another one of those stroke of luck things that when you're doing things the right way tends to kind of work out in your favor. But that was a big mistake as well. So I always encourage residents, have a loan payment plan in place. Know how you're going to manage your loans once you graduate. If you think you are going to be potentially in a public service loan forgiveness program that you're going to be working at a qualifying institution when you graduate, then it makes sense in training to make those income-based payments, which are going to be very, very low and in often cases even like $0. But you want to have those qualifying payments building up so that when you do graduate and those payments increase in size because your income increased, that you make the minimum amount before you reach forgiveness. If you do have private loans, then have a plan in place that you're going to pay those off aggressively in general within 5 and certainly within 10 years of graduating, depending on what the amount is. And I think the other mistake I made was I didn't really think about what I wanted my life to look like after I graduated. I didn't think about that until the very end. I kind of just said, I'm at an academic residency program. I'm just going to be in an academic position when I graduate, and that's just what it is because that's what I see. I didn't really think like, okay, this is what I want my practice to look like when I graduate. And I think a lot of residents make the same mistake. I think a lot of people in practice make the same mistake that they just go, I'm in this job. This is what it is. I'm just going to continue doing this forever. I think you actually have to sit with yourself and take some time to reflect and go, okay, my ideal practice, what does that look like? How much am I making? How much am I working? What types of patients am I seeing? Am I involved in teaching? Where am I located? Am I near family? Am I in this part of the country, that part of the country? And look at it and think about, okay, is this where I'm practicing now? Or is this where if you're in residency, is this where I'm kind of aiming myself to go or not? And you have to start aligning kind of your values with what you want your practice to be. Because too often we get caught in these situations that are not ideal for ourselves because we never just defined it for ourselves.
Okay, so the three big ones for you were failing to create a realistic savings plan and or a budget,
Hmm.
delaying debt payments for too long, and realizing that that was a big disadvantage. And not really conceptualizing what you wanted your life to look like after training, at
Yes.
least to a degree that would have been as thorough as you liked.
Yeah.
So in hindsight, you would have made a strict plan. And that's interesting you mentioned as well, because it gets you into the habit. I've been thinking about that as well as I'm approaching the beginning of medical school. It's probably going to be advantageous to create a budget plan just to get in the habit of not overspending, of staying in line and just maintaining that consistency so that once I get that big time income, it'll be much easier to handle it effectively. Would you agree?
Exactly. Yeah, I always say the budget, it's like I call it like it's like Nike style, you just have to do it. A
Yeah.
budget doesn't sound like a very exciting thing because we all think of it in this very restrictive sense of like my budget's telling me how little I have to spend on all the things I want and I hate this thing. You kind of almost have to flip your perspective and your mindset about it to go, okay, no, it's a permissive thing. My budget's telling me how much I have to spend on the things I want while I'm still able to reach my financial goals. And so it's a helpful thing. And, it's something my wife and I still do every month. And the more you do it, it becomes really easy because most of your expenses tend to be fairly cyclical, whether it's every month or every year that you have something coming up. And so once you do it a bunch, you can just sit at the end of the month and go, okay, this is how much we spent. Yeah, that's on par, with kind of what we're used to. This is how much we were able to save, etc. But in the beginning, it really forces you to kind of look at like, okay, what are my needs and what are my wants and where can I make compromises so that I can reach my financial goals, which once you set out your financial goals and realize like the prize at the end is financial freedom, which again is this idea I don't have to work if I don't want to, or if I do choose to work, I can do it on my own terms. If they say, hey, we need you to work more hours, you can just say no, because you don't need the money. And if they say, well, that means you need a new job, you can say, okay, no problem. I'll go out and I'll find a job that fits me if I want, or I don't have to anymore if I don't want to. So you have total freedom. That, once people define that, tends to be worth a lot more than the moment to moment, maybe wants they have in their budget that they go, okay, I can sacrifice this for that.
Incredible. Yeah. And that's exactly why financial freedom is worth striving for.
Yeah, exactly.
And you mentioned real estate playing a role in your financial journey. Do you have any advice for new residents, medical students, somebody interested in that space, particularly to those who are prospective or current physicians? Any advice for them who want to get involved in real estate?
Yeah, I mean, I've found it to be a very like rewarding thing. And there's lots of different ways you can do it. You don't necessarily have to actually own the properties and manage the properties like my wife and I do. That's certainly probably the way that's going to accelerate your wealth building the most. But there are opportunities where you can invest quote unquote passively, where you invest with a sponsor. So somebody who is actually owning the properties and then is collecting investments from other people to buy and manage those properties. But if you're interested in it, again, I didn't know anything about it before just learning about it. And I just saw other doctors and people doing it and seeing how it was working for them and going, well, why not me? If they can do it, then I can certainly learn about it. And that's always the first step, is learning about it. I think two great books to read on the topic: Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, which is a very well-known book. That kind of just talks about and illustrates how powerful real estate investing can be, and what it can bring you. And then for nuts and bolts, kind of learning about how it actually works, how to potentially analyze properties and buy properties and manage them. There's a book called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller. So on those topics, those are like my two favorite resources. But it is a really powerful thing because you get cash flow in the sense of you buy these properties. Yes, you have a mortgage, you have insurance, you have taxes, you have these expenses, but the rent you get from your tenants each month is above and beyond that, and that extra money you put in your pocket as cash flow. So from the 9 properties that my wife and I have now, we cash flow $10,000 to $11,000 a month. So that's a huge thing. We still largely use that to invest back in the real estate to get more. But if we wanted to, we could use it to pay for just our daily expenses, or when we decide that we want to retire or work less, we can use that to cover our expenses. So again, it's a really powerful tool. Do I think like every doctor has to do that to reach financial freedom? Absolutely not. but if it's something you're interested in, it's definitely powerful.
And were you and your wife together in medical school? Did you have your family as a student, resident? What did that look like for you?
We met my first year of medical school. We ended up getting married while I was in training and she was in her PhD. And then we had two of our three kids while I was in training and she was in her PhD. And the third one we had when I was in attending. So that's kind of where our family planning fit in.
Did that impact your financial journey in any significant manner?
Well, having kids definitely impacts your financial journey in a very negative way. I can tell you that. It's very rewarding and it's totally worth it, but they're expensive. So yeah, that it was a source of, I guess, pushing me to the point of where I was like, we need to figure this out. It's not just about us anymore. We want our kids to have a good life. We want to be a part of their life. I think that with financial freedom is a huge part of it because, I coach all my kids' baseball teams and basketball teams and stuff like that. And that's very important to me. And I'm able to take that time because I am on this path to financial freedom where I don't feel the pressure of chasing um, some extra income or something like that. Um, and I think then, we want to be role models for our kids and teach them how money is a tool that can be used when used correctly, can really bring a lot of joy to not only our own lives, but other people in our lives and the world at large through, charity and service and things like that.
Yeah, incredible. Absolutely. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure you would agree with this, with any intentional planning, you can work around most challenges successfully.
Yes, I 100%. I think that's like the most important mindset that anyone can have is for the things that are important, and that you really set out to, like you said, intentionally plan. There's always a solution. There's always a way.
And so, going back to the original part of your financial journey, what steps did you take to teach yourself? What did you do to, over time, learn more and more and develop your financial intelligence? Were you reading books? Were you podcasts? What were you doing? What was kind of your approach?
Yeah, I call it like micro dosing information. So what I did, again, I was still in training and really busy. So it wasn't like I could just sit and like read books and blogs all day. But what I said is, okay, I'm going to find a finance blog that resonates with myself. I'm going to read one post a day. So that generally takes like 5 to 10 minutes. And then I said, I'm going to try to read one personal finance book a year was what I said was my goal. And I said, I'm going to try to read like 10 pages a day. So the first one I read was called The Millionaire Next Door, which is a fantastic book. And yeah, so that was what I did. And I also said I'm going to try to listen to one mindset related or finance related podcast a week as well. And those are still habits that I have today because I've found a real passion for this stuff. But I still try to read at least one blog post a day. I read more than one book a year, but I try to read 10 or so pages a day, or up to a chapter a day in whatever chosen book I have at the time. And those just became very sustainable habits because what I see a lot of people do is like, okay, I need to get good at finance. I'm going to buy these 5 books off of Amazon and I'm going to read them all and I'm going to read these blogs and you try to bite off everything all at once. And then at a certain point, you just realize it's not sustainable. It's like the person who wants to get back in shape and says, like, okay, I'm going to go on like a totally restrictive diet and I'm going to exercise 2 hours a day. If you do all that, it's just not sustainable, especially in our life whether it's a medical student or a resident or a physician, attending physician. So yeah, that's kind of what I did.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that sounds about right, especially with your demanding schedule. Microdosing information is a great way to describe it.
Yeah,
So, that being said, how do you define success now? Is it any different from your definition back then?
yeah, it is for sure. Success back then, before I started, was, to be honest, it was a lot about what people thought about me. Was I kind of looked at it like, am I, do people see me as this like well-known, accomplished, academic plastic surgeon, things like that? Am I achieving success in that way? Honestly, it was very like externally defined. Do I look like success? Am I driving the car that people equate with success? Do I have the big house? Am I dressed in the way that, people attribute with a successful plastic surgeon? And it was distressful because I knew, without really knowing it, I knew that those things just didn't jive with what I actually wanted. But that's what I saw success defined as. And so I thought that's what should define my success as well. Now it's totally different. And basically, what I see it as is just living a life that is aligned with your values. And so for me, that was, really good, just top-notch patient care. And so that's what I strive for. I'm less worried now about, I was really into research and presenting at conferences and things like that, which I still think are, can be fulfilling, but my main focus is on patient care and just that aspect of being very clinically, less so research heavy in my work as a physician. What's most important is my time with my family, having time to do the things that I enjoy, things like reading, things like writing, which is through this blog. So that's how I see success is again being able to live your life as closely aligned to your values and on your terms as possible.
Yeah, that's a great definition. And do you think that that status-oriented approach is why many physicians still struggle financially?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a huge part of it because we just think we have to live up to this image, which is just made up, right? It's not necessarily even based in reality. And it's the same thing as like keeping up with the Joneses. And it's a very natural urge, even still today, that happens to me where sometimes if you see or hear something or see something on Instagram, you go, oh, well, they're taking that vacation or they have this or that. And you have to stop yourself and go like, okay, but no, let's just look at what I have and am I happy with that? Is that serving my purposes and who I want to be in this world? And if the answer is yes, then none of that other stuff matters.
Yeah. Instagram, more like, look at how much better my life is than yours
Well,
land.
exactly. That's exactly it. It just thrives off of those comparisons, which is just not based in reality pretty much all the time. And again, just does nothing for yourself actually.
Yeah, ultimately, we're all human beings and we're all kind of on the struggle bus, but on
Yeah,
Instagram, it's all perfection.
exactly. Yeah.
So the comparison, there's an interesting philosophy. It's like, don't compare yourself to other people, but compare yourself to who you were yesterday. Are you actively improving? Are you better than you were? That's who you should compare yourself to.
That's exactly it. Like the way you want to think about there's a book I read recently, which was, oh gosh, what is it called? The Courage to be Disliked. And I'm forgetting the author. But it's like, we tend to look at when we are looking at ourselves, we look at ourselves in a hierarchical, almost vertical way of like, okay, someone else is here and I'm here and I need to get up to there. The better way to look at it is almost like horizontally, we're all on this same plane of existence and of achievement and of success and have different versions of it. And we just need to look at where we are on that plane and are we ahead of where we were before or behind it and use that as kind of our judgment.
Yeah, because there's no matter what, there's always going to be somebody better than you.
Yeah, there's always somebody with more. Nobody has everything. You have to choose what's important to you and then strive along that path. If somebody else is on a different path because something else is important to them, it doesn't make sense comparing yourself like that.
And so you mentioned that you've got more or less one payment to make on your student loan debt. Would you consider yourself financially free currently, or will that be not until that debt is completely paid off?
It's not, it again, it all becomes these interesting definitions because it's like, yes, once that debt is paid off, if my wife and I decided that we were just going to only cover the expenses we have now, then yes, we would technically be financially free. But it would be like every month that we were ending up with a net zero, which is not exactly like our idea or level of comfort. We almost want to have our expenses be less than our income even when we're just considering our more passive income and stuff like that. So, and then there's concepts of like, people talk about fat fire, like, you want to be able to cover some lavish lifestyle while when you reach financial freedom. And that's not necessarily what we strive to, but we want to be able to live comfortably, to not sacrifice the lifestyle we have now. So the good thing is that, I really, really enjoy what I do working. I'm still full-time physician, 1.0 FTE, and I still love it. So I plan to continue until I don't. And who knows when that may be. Right now, I think I have a long time to go. But again, being closer on that path to financial freedom just gives you the kind of mental relaxation or buffer that hey, if this changed, I would still be okay. Whereas before, it wasn't like that. The concern was like, I feel burned out now. If I'm burned out now as an attending, if I'm burned out in 5 years or something, what am I going to do? I'm going to need to make all this income in order to cover my expenses. I'm going to be hating the job that I'm doing. That's going to impact patient care, and I'm just going to feel like this after everything that I put into it. That really stinks. So it's that feeling that, hey, we'd be okay even without this, and I think that's powerful, and like in some sort of ironic, or maybe that's not even the right word, but allows you to work longer.
No, that makes sense. I mean, kind of reminds me of what you mentioned earlier of how when you created the plan that enabled you to just really enjoy your work more. It seems like
Yeah,
a similar idea there. It just empowers you to just dive all in because you know everything's good on the other side.
yeah, exactly.
And when you were a first year med student or just a med student in general, did you expect you'd be in a position like this where you are now?
No, I don't think so. I don't know what I expected back then, but no, I think what I attribute it to is, like you said before, is intentional planning. I can go back, and as a medical student, I still have it, the sheet to this day, that I wrote down, what I wanted to accomplish by the end of residency. And again, a lot of that was based in um, probably more external expectations than I would have now. But because of that, I was able to achieve those things in the level of training that I wanted. When I discovered this kind of, financial well-being and financial freedom, we wrote down a financial plan of what our goals are. And we've been able to largely achieve most of them. I still write down on a daily, monthly, yearly basis the things that I want to achieve and work towards, so that I know on a daily basis what I'm aiming for. And so I think that's been how I've been able to get there. And it's evolved throughout that path. So yeah, in medical school, did I expect to be here necessarily? No, I probably would have told you you're crazy if you said you were in Buffalo, you're in a pseudo academic job, and you have a blog talking about financial well-being. I would have said, like, that must be some alternative universe. But I think through that intentional planning and trying to align things with my values as I've gone on, that's what's got me here, and I'm very happy to be here. And who knows where I'll be in 10, 15 years from now.
Yeah. No, I mean, the work you've done is very inspiring. I know it's impacted my journey. It's offered me some great insight looking forward. And guys like you are the ones that younger medical students and residents should be looking at for how they can plan for their financial futures, how they can really maximize their potential in life because it's multifaceted. Of course, like there's fitness, there's finance, there's family, there's social,
Yep.
all these things. And you're a great example for what it can look like with discipline and intentional planning. So it's very great to have heard you discuss some of your journey, some of your insights here, Dr. Frey. And as we part ways, I want to ask you one final question. The mission of this podcast is to give successful people a platform to share their experiences and insights to help optimize the journey of lifelong learning and self improvement in medicine and beyond. So, do you have any advice for the listeners in line with that mission?
Yes, and I'll say first, thank you for having me. And I think what you're doing is fantastic, and the fact you're doing it, so early on and stuff, and have this mindset is really, really incredible. So I look forward to following all the amazing things you're going to do. Um, yeah, I think it kind of just dovetails off a lot of what we've talked about. Is what you can do to be the most successful is define what success means to you personally at all stages. And like we said, these things will evolve over time. But if you have that defined, you'll be able to chase what you want, and you will be successful getting there. I think most people, once we know where we want to go, we ultimately get there. The hardest thing is figuring out where you want to go. And that should be very internally driven by you and your loved ones around you, rather than externally. And I think that's very tough to do in general, and especially in medicine. And so that's what I would encourage all of you to do, and take some time. And as I've never been the person before these past, probably 5, 7 years to like write these things down or write what my values are or write what my, thoughts on something are. And that's what I do all the time now, whether it's in notebooks or on the computer or on my phone in the notes app. And that's really helped to guide me. So that's a little more practical bent on it. But that would be my advice.
Absolutely. It's a very important to have a clear vision to define what success means to you personally, not from an external lens, but more so from within, based on your truest values. Because once you do that, you can pursue it relentlessly and you will eventually get there with persistence. And then
Exactly.
taking the time to write those things down and really, really manifest them, really put them into a clear perspective so you know exactly what you're working through. Incredible advice.
Exactly.
Dr. Frey, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Curtis. I appreciate it.